thank you all for coming, and thank you for hosting us. And as what Phil said, we're very honored that you would invite us into this house. For how many people have not been here? Okay.
That's a lot.
Well, let's describe the house for a moment. Now, you probably know the house pretty well, and the architect was. You describe why it works, but when we redid the Kennedy Centers, you know, the Reach, we picked an architect who happened to be the same architect who designed this house. Now, I can't say we picked the architect because he designed this house, but he's a really creative architect named Stephen Hall. And when I picked that architect, I later learned that this the house he built here, and I can see some of the same touches. But what is it like to live in this house?
It's an amazing experience. It's an amazing experience because this is a working instrument. There's nothing equivalent. It is very flexible. You can have from big events with 100 to 120 people to events with more than 1,700 guests. We have that twice a year. To very intimate dinners, so you can really change the shape of the building. It's very well built. To live, of course, we live upstairs with my wife, and this is a little bit more intimate because you can imagine being alone, the two of us in such a huge building.
Now, in the introduction, it was said that you're an expert ornithologist, or you're a very devoted ornithologist. So explain to me what an ornithologist like you does. You go out and look at birds, and that's what you do?
Yes, I do get out and look at birds, but it's much more than that. It's enjoying the incredible moments when you're waiting for the bird and seeing the light change and enjoying places that you normally wouldn't go to. It's also the hunt, but without feeling. It's looking for a very specific animal, a very specific bird, and then photographing it because I'm a bird photographer, and not killing it, but just fixing it for eternity.
So here's what I never understood. Ornithologists, I know some people they call them bird watchers sometimes. Mm-hmm. They go out and say, I saw this number of this species or that one, but unless you take photographs, you just rely on somebody's word that they saw it. Is there a little dishonesty that ever goes on in that world?
Dishonesty in the bird watching world is really something that you can't afford. If you're caught once cheating, it's over. You will never be taken seriously again. And there is a great ornithologist from the 19th century, a British ornithologist. Now people have been discovering that he had been cheating, and his whole legacy is now destroyed.
So it's like politics. No, you have to be honest.
It's like politics. You should be honest.
Okay. Yeah. So let's talk about what is the difference between being ambassador under President Trump and President Biden? Is there a real difference for an ambassador?
Yes, there is. There is a real difference. Though, in speaking in terms of Switzerland's strategic interests, they remain the same, and the relationship remains the same. Let's say that one administration is maybe more process-driven.
That would be the Trump.
One is more process-driven than the other, and thus maybe a little bit slower in making decisions. But in the end, you know, it always comes out all right.
So this is the highest part of the Swiss Foreign Service, being ambassador here, or so when you get to be the U.S. ambassador, you've been the ambassador now since 2019.
To the U.S., yes.
Right. And so you have a fixed term? Do you stay for 4 years, or?
It's normally 4 years. I should have been gone last summer, but I think my government didn't want me back. So they give me another, sorry. Okay. They didn't want me back, so they gave me another year.
So you're going to leave at the end
of next summer.
Okay. And what will you do when you leave?
I will either go to the next posting, which depends what the government gives me, or I would maybe like to stay in the U.S. Because, but maybe in academia or whatever, because this is the country where it happens. I'm sure we will have the opportunity to talk about that.
So let me ask you, related to that, when you our ambassador, do you have to go out to dinner every night somewhere in Washington?
You have either to have a dinner at your home or to go out for dinner every night. So it's normally 5 nights a week, 3 to 4 events here and 1 event outside. But the good thing about Washington is that it's dead on the weekend. So at least Saturday, Sunday, and usually Friday night, you're more or less, you're okay.
But how do you stay in shape? You have to go to these dinners every night, diplomatic dinners.
You pretend to eat, you pretend to drink, and you go working out early in the morning.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So today, is there a big issue between the United States and Switzerland? What's the biggest issue that we have, if any, between us?
Right now, we don't have a big issue. We used to have. There was the whole question about the banking secrecy, and prior to that, in the late 90s, there was the question of the Jewish dormant accounts from World War II. Right now, there is no big issue, but there are lots of small issues where we can work together.
So you don't have that much to do then, Louis?
No, I'm totally bored. Yeah, it's terrible.
Okay.
It's terrible, yeah.
All right. So let's talk about Switzerland itself. What is the population of Switzerland?
8.5 million, 2 blocks in New York.
And what's the GDP of Switzerland?
And the GDP is close to $1 trillion. So by size of the GDP, we would be the 7th biggest state of the US.
So Switzerland is a country which was created, 700 years ago or so?
So that's the legend. Of course, the original Switzerland was created in 1315. So yeah, that's more than 700 years ago. But then a succession of small communities agglomerated into something called the Swiss Confederation, mostly not necessarily out of love for each other, but out of fear of the bigger neighbors. So they felt they would be better off together than being part of the big national states that were emerging around them. And so it's interesting, I keep saying Switzerland is a marriage of convenience. And quite often marriages of convenience work as well as marriages of love.
So it's Switzerland. Well, what were the Switzers? What's
the Switzer? It's one of the original cantons called Schwyz, one of the 3 original cantons, and somehow the name stuck. And even the Swiss flag is inspired from the flag of one of the 3 original cantons.
So Switzerland has always been known as a neutral country. What does it mean to be neutral?
First of all, it has always been known as a neutral country, but it wasn't, because in the 13th, 14th, and 15th century, we were kind of the Sparta of Europe, where we had a very high demographic growth. We had all these young males that we couldn't feed properly because we were living in the mountains. So we basically trained them to be professional killers. And after a couple of resounding victories against the greatest powers in Europe, we were soundly defeated by the French, of all people, because the French had developed a weapon that we couldn't afford, which was artillery. And from then on, we became neutral, but we still didn't know what to do with all these young males. So we became the Wagner Group of Europe. And for 3 centuries, we were the main exporters of mercenaries to everyone who would pay. So Swiss mercenaries served under every possible, from the Russian army to the British forces, but especially for the French.
All right. So now your main export is what?
So our main export is by far, if you take it as a single, it's pharmaceuticals. It's pharmaceuticals. So that's we have to do away with the bank and watches and chocolate thing. Because we have excellent banks. They tend to merge from time to time, but we have of course brilliant chocolate. We have the best watches in the world. That's a fact. But it's only but a small part of our GDP. And actually, our GDP is more. It's services, and it's a lot of very high tech industry.
Well, your Swiss watches are famous. What do you do that makes your watches better than somebody else's watches? Do you tell time better, or what do they do?
It's everything from the quality of the engineering to the design to the tradition that's put into them, which makes a difference to another just timepiece.
They're really made in Switzerland, not made in China. They're really made in Switzerland.
No, they're really made in Switzerland. They're really made in Switzerland.
Right, and how are your chocolates better than other people's chocolates?
Our chocolate, ranks amongst the 3 best chocolates in the world. I have to agree that the Belgians have excellent chocolate, and so do the French. But we are somehow we are in the top 3. Our chocolate is different because we do milk chocolate, and the other ones do more traditional chocolate.
So for many years, Switzerland was known as a banking center because of its secrecy. Yet they would never tell anybody, regulators or anybody, who were their clients and so forth, never disclose anything. But that went away years ago, is that right?
2008, and it should have gone away earlier, but there was a strong resistance, especially by certain parts of the banking sector. And what other people, and I was one of them, had been advocating and preaching for a very long time happened, which is that we abolished the banking secrecy and the banking sector is doing very well.
But you're still doing okay, because why do people still want to put their money in Swiss banks then?
They would put their money in Swiss banks for very clear reasons. Political stability, monetary stability, or if at all the Swiss franc goes up, predictability, and also security. Security because you have a Swiss bank, but at the same time your kids are in a Swiss school. They don't need bodyguards. You get treatment in a Swiss hospital. People keep putting their money into Swiss banks because it's a very good banking sector, and without the banking secrecy.
Okay, so Americans, if they put money in Swiss banks, we have to report it to the IRS.
Sure.
So it's a disincentive because if you report a foreign banking account, somebody will think you're hiding something. So I used to have a Swiss bank account, but then I realized I have to report the IRS, and there wasn't anything illegal about it, but I didn't want to ever say that I was doing something wrong, so I had to close it out. But a lot of Americans don't have Swiss bank accounts for that reason.
Which is a pity because they would be better off with one. But the reality, what's funny is, and this is a true story. The moment I got my nomination by the Federal Council to be the ambassador to the US, I got this phone call from my bank, a bank that I had been with for 30 years, which in the meantime disappeared and merged with a bigger bank. And their message was a very nice one. Congratulations, Mr. Ambassador. You have 2 weeks to close down your account because we can't bother with someone who is going to live in the US. And I had to go all the way to the CEO to be able to keep my bank account at the defunct Credit Suisse. Yeah.
So speaking of Credit Suisse, what happened to Credit Suisse?
Now, this one is going to be streamed at some point, so I have to be, let's say that it was probably not the best example of brilliant management, and what happened was a case of mismanagement that ended in a panic that maybe could have been prevented, and I personally think that what the Swiss government did over the 72 hours, because it was 72 hours to save the bank before panic set in. At the moment when in California, other banks were going down the drain, and there were rumors about a big European bank going down the drain too. And our government had 72 hours to restore confidence. Now we can argue forever as Monday morning quarterbacks whether they did the right thing. But what's certain is that the banking crisis didn't happen.
So Switzerland is voted by U.S. News and other places as the best country in the world in which to live. I'm sure you're familiar with this. So
Yeah.
Why is Switzerland so popular? And suppose I wanted to live there. Is it easy to be a resident there? And suppose you want to be a citizen. How hard is that?
Oh, it's extremely difficult. It's extremely complex. No, it takes time. It takes time from the moment you get residency. It takes, if I'm not mistaken, 5 years. You have to have lived 5 years uninterruptedly in Switzerland, more than 9 months a year, to be able to apply. And then you will have to undergo an examination about Swiss history, your mastery of one of the national languages, and not cheesemaking.
But other people from around the world often want to be Swiss citizens, very pleasant place and so forth. But Americans don't get any advantage because you still have worldwide taxation and so forth. So Americans still have to pay U.S. taxes, even if they live in Switzerland, right?
But that's definitely your problem. I think you are one of the very few countries that tax their citizens abroad. Well, most countries don't do that. We don't do that.
So let's talk about your background. Where did you grow up? Where were you born?
I was born in Zurich, but very early on, my parents came back. My father was a doctor at the University Hospital in Zurich, and then I grew up in the mountains in the Canton du Valais, close to Zermatt.
If you grew up there, you must be a great skier.
I'm a decent skier. I think I'm a decent skier, yeah.
So what did you decide you wanted to do when you were in school?
I wanted to be a spy. And then my mother forced me to be a diplomat.
But you were in the intelligence service.
So after joining the diplomatic service, after 3 years, I was kind of bored and I joined the intelligence service and I made my career there. I became the head in 2000, and then in 2005.
You were the head of the Swiss intelligence service.
Yeah. And then in 2005, my wife forced me to go back to the domestic, to the diplomatic service.
But like the United States, we have lots of enemies. We got lots of wars we're always fighting. We have a gigantic CIA. Does Switzerland really need a big intelligence service? I mean,
yes, we do. Yes, we do, because we are not immune to the risks that are befalling the rest of. Maybe we are less at risk of a military aggression, but you would not imagine the kind of intelligence operations taking place on Swiss territory, including against Switzerland. Not just because Switzerland is a place where you can run intelligence operations against third parties. There is a lot going on against us, including, of course, economic and scientific and technological espionage.
Who are your enemies?
We have a lot of espionage coming from the same countries that are very active in the US.
Oh, okay. So now you're out of the Swiss intelligence service completely, right?
Yeah, of course.
Right, okay.
I mean, the moment you're out, you're out. Yeah.
Okay, so now Switzerland, as the head of the U.S. Embassy here, how big is your embassy? How many people do you have, professional staff?
So all in all, we are around 75 people in Washington, but all over the United States, including the consulate generals and the honorary consuls, I must have around 250 people.
Where are your consulates?
San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Atlanta, and Boston. And I would like to have one in Dallas, frankly. I would like to have something in Texas.
Okay. All right, and today, who do you report to? The head of the Swiss the foreign ministry, or who do you report to?
I report, depending on the topic, but I report anyway to my ministry, but if it's about, let's say, double taxation agreement, I will report to the finance ministry. If it's about the F-35 and the negotiations around the F-35, it will be to the Minister of Defense, so it really depends.
Can you explain the Swiss federal government system? You have a...
No.
So every year you have a new president or something like that? How does that work? Who's the president of Switzerland?
Let me think about this. Okay, so this year it's Viola Amert. Since 9 days, she is the Minister of Defense. We have this very peculiar system. Do not forget that Switzerland is a country of minorities. There are no majorities. Because, of course, there is a majority of German speakers, though Germans would argue that they don't speak German anyway. But the fact is that then you have the divisions between Catholic and Protestants, then cities and countryside, mountains against the flatlands, which we call flatland, you would call them mountains. And so in the end, everything is based on consensus. So we have a system with 7 ministers. All the main political parties are represented. They are elected by parliament, and each one in her or his turn is president. So sometimes I have to think about who is my president this year, really.
So every year you have a new president, all right? And then you elect it, or is it just rotation? Each canton gets their person to be the president?
No. Every year one of the ministers is elected, but it's according to rotation. So it's not in the constitution, but that it has.
Okay, but do the people vote for the new president? You have direct election?
No, we don't vote for the executive. We vote only for parliament. The members of the executive are elected by parliament.
Okay. Now, during World War II, Switzerland was not invaded by the Nazis. Why was that? Why do you think Nazis could have presumably invaded and taken all the gold and everything? Why do you think the Nazis did not invade Switzerland?
The main reason why they did not invade Switzerland in 1940 was geography. The Belgium and the Netherlands were flat and we were not. So the invasion went through the militarily easier solution. They would have probably crushed us in 2 weeks. By 1941-42, the proposition of invading Switzerland would have been not very productive for Germany because we had improved our defenses massively. And also because in the meantime, they had realized that they needed Switzerland as the conduit, kind of a conduit to the outer world for, financial transactions, for all kind of transactions, and Switzerland was useful to them and was more useful to them not being occupied. And try and imagine by 1942, the 20 divisions they would have needed to take Switzerland, they needed them badly on the Eastern Front. So they didn't do it. But we were lucky, very lucky.
What do you think about the theory that some people have is that the Nazi generals and senior officials had their Swiss bank accounts and they didn't want to ruin the banking system by invading? You don't subscribe to that?
It's a very nice theory, but that's totally disproven by historical research. And if you look at what the Nazis were, what actually Hitler himself said repeatedly was, let's take care of the big guys first. We will take care of Switzerland once we finish the big guys. And he said it repeatedly, and there were plans by the Wehrmacht to invade Switzerland. But in due time, because they didn't need to invade us right then, they first wanted to finish the Soviet Union and England.
So let's talk about your neutrality policy. You can explain it better. Recently, Switzerland, I think its federal government said that we support Ukraine's efforts to eject Russia. Is that right?
No. So what our government said was we do support the EU sanctions, and it was not the first time we were joining EU sanctions, and that's perfectly compatible with neutrality law. But we had for a long time a neutrality policy that was very extensive, which I'm pushing it, but it was almost to the point of there is a genocide taking place here, I'm just looking the other way because I'm neutral. And somehow, once the Russian aggression against Ukraine occurred, it was not possible to remain neutral in that sense. But legally speaking, we are still neutral. We didn't join any alliance. We didn't deliver weapons to Ukraine. So we've been helping the Ukraine with money and with humanitarian aid, but not with aid.
And do you think that in Europe, the Swiss and others are going to continue to support Ukraine? Obviously, the support in the United States seems to be reduced a bit in the Republican Party, at least. Do you see any diminution in Europe or in Switzerland, the support for Ukraine?
There certainly is, all over the continent, a certain Ukraine fatigue, but anyone with a basic understanding of security policy knows that we can't let Vladimir Putin win this one. We just can't, because that would be the end of European security and European security architecture as we know it. So we have to stand firm.
All right, what is Switzerland's policy, if it has one, on Israel and Gaza? Are you supporting the effort that some support to have Israel stop its war, or are you supporting Israel, or do you have a position that's neutral?
The position of my country has been, from the beginning, that the attacks of October 7th were terrorist attacks there is no excuse for the kind of horrific acts that were committed by Hamas, and there was no ambiguity in condemning what Hamas did on October 7th. We also recognize the right of the State of Israel to react militarily. We also, as the guardians of the Geneva Convention, always insist that all parties to a conflict have to abide by the rules of war, and there have been certain violations by Tzahal that don't make it easy. Let's say that it's fairly difficult. It's fairly difficult. We have always to talk to our Israeli friends and remind them that even in a war that has been set off by the horrific acts of October 7th, they're still bound by the Geneva Convention.
Suppose people want to visit Switzerland. What's the best thing to visit in Switzerland? Why should somebody want to visit Switzerland? What's the great thing there to see?
The most amazing thing, I personally think, is to hike along the Alps for 6 or 7 months. And to see and to move from one extraordinary landscape to the next, moving from one culture to the next, from one language to the next, from one culinary culture to the next, all within a territory that is the size more or less of half of Virginia. Of course, if we were to flatten out Switzerland, we would be as big as the United States. No, but we would be big. Yeah? On a territory that's 41,000 square kilometers. In case you didn't notice, the rest of the world uses the metric system. So that would be 26,000 square miles. So it's a small country.
And so if you grow up in Switzerland, one grows up in Switzerland, let's say in Geneva and or Zurich, do you automatically have to learn the language of the other part of Switzerland?
In theory, yes. When you go to school, primary school, they start teaching you German or French, or in the Italian part, they would choose between also German or French. Romansh, frankly, spoken by 40,000 Swiss citizens, is definitely not the priority. You have to, that's in theory. We are not as proficient in languages as people sometimes think. Frankly, I do think that generally the Scandinavians are better at languages than we are, but don't tell the Swiss.
No.
Yeah.
You speak how many languages?
Yeah, but fluently 6. And then I have a smattering of others.
Oh, that's a lot. How did you learn that many languages?
Probably because I have some sort of musical ear, I guess, and because I grew up in a multilingual family.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about something you did in Africa. You have a very big interest in Africa.
Yes, indeed.
So when you were there, you tried to do something that would maybe eliminate some of the horrors in Africa. Can you describe what you tried to do to kind of bring to justice people who did some things that weren't so great?
Yeah, to put it in a nutshell, I was an unwilling and actually accidental witness to the Rwanda genocide in 1994. And so after being PTSD'd for the rest of my life by what I had seen, I decided that I would have to do something about it. And since my job was intelligence, I decided that I would create my very small, very modest Simon Wiesenthal Center and go after the people who had committed the genocide. And I got a few of them, and they were delivered either to Swiss courts or to the International Court in Arusha. And that was my contribution to trying to restore some
You
sort of
served as
justice.
an ambassador in Africa.
Yeah.
For how many different places?
So I was ambassador based in Kenya, but I was covering Somalia, which I loved. Somalia, a fascinating country. Rwanda, the country of my heart, my much better half is from Rwanda. She's a survivor of 1994, and Burundi and Uganda. So,
Okay. And so how many embassies does Switzerland have around the world?
120. We have a lot. We have a lot of representations in the world. We are trying to be universal. Of course, it's not possible because in the end you can't be everywhere when you're a country of 8 million. But yeah.
So what is your observation about the way our government works?
It's totally fascinating. No, your government is like any giant organization. It's huge, and sometimes the left hand really doesn't know what the right hand is doing. But basically, having experienced many different governments in many different countries, yours is definitely not the worst.
Some people say the right hand doesn't know what the far right hand is doing. But, okay. So if you need to get a hold of somebody in the U.S. government, is it difficult for you to get somebody on the phone, get a meeting with the State Department or senator, or how hard is that to do?
The problem when you're a small country like Switzerland is to get attention. Because if you're a small country, you should either be extremely rich or extremely bothersome. But if you're a country that doesn't create any major problems, it's always a little bit difficult to get the attention of a capital that has other and bigger fish to fry. So I'm actually thinking of proposing to our government to develop our nuclear weapon arsenal, because then we would get Washington's attention. No, frankly, we have the level of attention that a country like ours deserves. I have to add something. We are the 7th biggest investor in the American economy. And in research and development, we have 2 small competitors. One is Japan, the other one is Germany. Everyone is behind us. So we are the 3rd biggest investor in R&D in the US, meaning that if we don't always get the attention of the government, we definitely get the attention of the private sector.
You have an enormous amount of gold in Switzerland.
Yes.
Why do you need all that gold?
One never knows.
Right.
And
Why will Switzerland ever join the EU?
Frankly, I think not in my lifetime.
Really?
Which I hope is going to be for quite a few years. But no, I don't think so. I don't see Switzerland joining either the EU or NATO, because we are speaking of NATO, we are too stuck in our own self-made mythology of the eternally neutral Switzerland, which we have sold to our population so well that now they even believe it. And so NATO, I don't see it happening. And the EU, frankly, I think that if we were to vote tomorrow, because in Switzerland we would vote about joining the EU, it would be an 85% no.
And what about the currency? You're never going to get rid of this, your currency?
We don't like weak currencies. We don't like weak currencies. That's the reason why we're not joining the euro and we are not thinking of dollar.
Right, so you love your currency.
No, we love strong currencies. The currency thing is really interesting. It served us very well to keep the Swiss franc, but it has also been an incredible challenge. If you think that by the time the euro was introduced, it was worth 1.35, 1 franc 35. Now it's 0.8. And the dollar was at 1.21 back then, and now it's at 0.89. Meaning, can you imagine for a country that's living 51% out of exports, what it means in terms of improving your productivity?
I see.
It's crazy.
So when you go around the country and you tell people you're the ambassador for Switzerland, what is the most frequent question you're asked?
The most frequent, the most fascinating thing is everyone loves us without knowing us really. So without knowing really why. But Switzerland has a positive image as peaceful, and sometimes, and it's no joke, of course they confuse us with Sweden. Though if you were to ask Europeans to list all the American states, you would probably also. We have to be a little bit humble about our own knowledge. But generally, the question I'm asked, there are no questions. People say, "Oh, Switzerland, great. We love Switzerland."
So what do you want most Americans to know about Switzerland that you think they don't know?
What I want most Americans to know about Switzerland is that we are an economic and scientific superpower, that we are one of the main partners of the United States in space, in quantum, in wherever you look, and that our relationship is the best example of how globalization can work when it's between the same kind of mature economies that are playing by the rules. And then it's really, globalization really works then.
So in the United States, we have role models or heroes or people that Americans look up to, Abraham Lincoln or George Washington or somebody like that, or maybe athletes. Are there people in Switzerland who are great heroes to the average Swiss person, people who are either government leaders, religious leaders, or cultural leaders, or who are the great heroes to the Swiss?
I think that the only person that everyone agrees with agrees on is Roger Federer. But generally, we have this thing called the federal guillotine, which is that in the Swiss system, if you are a head above the crowd, they will usually cut it. So even if you are a dominating personality and really someone, you try to play it humble. So even if you are a billionaire, you will drive to work in your Volkswagen and you will drive your Ferrari on the weekend. Because that's the federal guillotine, that's the way it is. And it has been for a long time. We don't like strong personality. Well, of course we have them, but they're supposed to pretend they're not.
Is Roger Federer, though he's not actively playing now, is he still very popular?
Oh yeah, yes he is. He's also because he's humble.
Oh. So is Donald Trump very popular in Switzerland?
Donald Trump is, okay, now seriously, there is in Europe a groundswell that has been there for a long time of fundamental anti-Americanism. And it has to do with the fact that you replaced Europe as the world's superpower. And even worse, you saved our collective butts 3 to 4 times, and that's inexcusable. So there is a groundswell of anti-Americanism. There is also a level of ignorance about American politics that is absolutely flabbergasting. You read European newspapers and you live in the US and you see the interpretation of American politics, and people don't understand much about what's happening in this country. So there is I would say generally Donald Trump is very unpopular, but I would say he's widely unpopular, but there are also quite a few people who would vote for Orban, who voted for Berlusconi, who voted for other leaders of the same cloth, and they like Donald Trump. So he's not as unpopular as one could think.
Okay, so you're very kind to serve us dinner later in a buffet dinner. Are there famous Swiss dishes that Switzerland is famous for?
There is no such thing as a Swiss cuisine because there are so many different cultures, but there are dishes from parts of Switzerland that are certainly very, very popular. And to the dismay of our Western neighbor, last year there was a survey done worldwide about the world's most popular dish, and it was raclette. And by the way, raclette comes from my canton, not from Switzerland. It comes from my canton. So I was very proud.
So when you have a weekend off and you're not going to a dinner and you walk around Washington, what is it that you enjoy doing in Washington, you and your wife? What do you enjoy doing in Washington?
The US is an incredible country where there is so much to learn. There are the most incredible museums. There are the most incredible people. By the way, for those of you who play golf, give up golfing and start bird watching, because nowadays bird watching is where you meet the really interesting people. You will be so surprised at the people you meet bird watching, from members of Congress to the best journalists to CEOs and whatever. You see each other in birding outfit and you start talking birds, and at some point you ask the other person, who are you? And then you realize that's someone important. But there is so much to see, so much to do, and this country is so diverse. So if you're in Savannah, next thing you know, you're in Phoenix, and then you're in Chicago, and every time there is another music, there is another culture, there is another vibe. Hey, it's never boring here.
So in Switzerland, are there political figures in the United States or cultural figures or athletic figures who are very popular, or Americans very popular in Switzerland?
Yes, John F. Kennedy. JFK is definitely the iconic American president, and of course President Lincoln. Those are the two that every school child will know about.
Now you have one daughter. Is she grown, or is she grown out of school now?
She just started university in Madrid, Spain.
Hey, and what does she want to be, an ambassador? Or?
I hope not. But she wants to be a lawyer, like her dad.
Oh.
Yes, I know.
Try private equity, it's more profitable.
I'm told, yes.
I don't know, lawyering, I don't know, but okay. So when we have questions from our members, what is when you leave this position, what will you take away as your memory of Washington, D.C.? Is it that it's a friendly place, or you got a lot of interesting people, it's a beautiful city, or the government's dysfunctional? What would you think you'll take away as the memory, and what will you be most proud of having achieved as ambassador?
So I was about to say all of the above, but this is an incredible city. Whether people outside Washington like it or not, it's still the imperial Rome. So that's where, with the notable exception of the Swiss, everyone else sends their best people. And so you meet incredible people in Washington D.C. all the time. I've spent nights with the leadership of NASA. Next thing you know, with the best quantum scientists. Next thing you know, with the best experts on Afghanistan. And every night you learn something. It's absolutely amazing. So that's something I will take with me. And the other thing I would take with me is if this country does it right, the 21st century is going to be American. Because you still have all the ingredients to be the superpower of the 21st century.
And in any of the other postings, have you had an economic club as vibrant or dynamic as the Economic Club of Washington?
Of course not. Of course not. That's unique.
Right.
That's unique.
That's the right answer. Okay. So we have time for questions. We have about 15 minutes allocated. Raise your hand and we'll get a mic. And
Ambassador Marian Mujica, we met earlier. Thank you for having us. I would love to hear your thoughts, because I years ago worked for the Iran desk at the State Department, how it is representing the U.S. interests in Iran in terms of just the experience of doing so, and if you think the U.S. could possibly re-engage with Iran as it did before, whether on the nuclear front or otherwise, or do you think it's gone too far apart at this point?
One of the best aspects of my job here is to be representing the protecting power of the United States in the Islamic Republic of Iran, which brings me to be in the very center of everything that's happening between the two countries. And this is one of the most fascinating aspects of my task here. Of course, we were terribly unhappy when President Trump decided to leave the JCPOA, because we thought it was an imperfect treaty, but it was better than having nothing, which is what we have now. And who are we to tell the U.S. government what they should do? Some administrations tend to listen, others don't. We have a certain experience in Iran. We've been there for the last 40 years and representing you. It's very, very, very complicated. Now it's going in the wrong direction. It's definitely going in the wrong direction. There was hope that at some point the hardliners would lose. They didn't. They didn't, and they are firmly in power. They are firmly in power. We don't see a regime change anytime soon.
Other questions? Mike, back here? Here.
Mr. Ambassador, when you came in 2019, I'm assuming you got a full debrief completely and you read a lot about the US. You've been here now 4 years. Has anything surprised you professionally or personally after actually coming to DC?
One thing I had not realized, and it took me more studies and reading more books and meeting more people, is how the biggest missed opportunity in the history of this country was the failed reconstruction. And how, because of the failed policies of successive presidents who wouldn't listen to what President Grant had to say, the US created problems that are not solved yet, which we have seen. I mean, 2020 was also a year where we saw a lot of things, and it took me a long time to realize how deep and how festering the wounds of the Civil War still are. And it ended up with people waving a Confederacy flag, a secession flag in the Capitol on January the 6th. That was not a nice picture.
Where were you on January 6th?
I was here, and I was calling my government because my president, who was he? My president was calling me and saying, "What's happening in Washington D.C.?" And I said, but frankly, I don't remember what I say, Madam President or Mr. President, because I don't remember who it was. But I said, listen, you can go into the Council of Ministers meeting and tell them there are a bunch of hooligans storming the Capitol, but the institutions will stand firm, and President Biden will be president, and don't think this is a coup that's going to work. Yeah.
Okay, other questions back here? Right back here. Oh, I'm sorry, there, go ahead.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you. I'm curious because I read the news that CERN plans to build an even bigger Hadron Collider in Switzerland. Is that still underway? And if so, what do you hope to achieve with the new collider?
So if we build it, and I'm not aware of the latest details of the project, but if we build it, it will not be only in Switzerland. Actually, the smaller part will be in Switzerland and the larger part will be in France, like the other two colliders we already have. We believe in fundamental science. And we believe in the fundamental science to the point where the big collider that you are building in Chicago, but which is not a circular, it's a straight collider. It's built by the University of Bern, so we are involved. And we believe that fundamental science is something we should invest in even more than we did before.
Okay, then there was a question back here.
I believe you said that if we do it right, that the 21st century will be an American century. Would you mind defining what do it right means?
Yes, it means being a little bit more Swiss. Meaning accepting the fact that the other half of the population that has different political opinions, that they are still humans, that they are still worthy of debating and debating with. You have to go back to some sort of bipartisanship, because if you don't, this country is doomed to be stuck in ridiculous ideological fights, and it's not going to help. If you go back to bipartisanship, nothing is going to stop you. It's pretty simple.
Okay, questions? Another question here?
Thanks. Yes, thank you, Mr. Professor Maureen Pepperell. I had the pleasure of living full-time in Switzerland for 10 years, and now I sort of go back and forth. The question about how the society is changing, and granted, there's a lot of different societies within Switzerland, but I noticed, and I wanted to ask you, from 2004, when I first was spending time there, until like last year, what do you see in public? You see more diversity, more couples of mixed race, more mixed race children, more gay couples out in the open. I was a little bit surprised, actually, that Switzerland seemed to have moved that way. Is it just me? Is it just Lausanne? Or is there some social changes happening along some of the same dimensions that we look at here?
We have 2 million people crossing the border every day. We have 1/3 of the population that's either foreign born or their parents were foreign born. So Switzerland, like the US, is changing every day. And it's not immune from what's happening elsewhere. So I think we are definitely a much more open society than we were when I was a child or a young adult. And I think it's for the better. I think it's for the better. Of course, we are struggling, like everyone else, with some difficulties in integrating the vast number, because we have proportionally more immigrants than the US. Actually, we have more. We are sometimes struggling, but we are fairly successful at integrating them. And at the same time, we have moved maybe a bit slower, more slowly than the rest of Europe, towards being a more liberal country in let's say, lifestyle questions. So yes, Switzerland has changed, definitely. Compared to my youth, yes. And my youth was a long time ago.
Switzerland's going to be in the news again next week when Davos appears. You'll be in Davos.
Yes.
Does Davos accomplish anything, you ever think?
Well, it certainly does accomplish something for Switzerland, which is that because we are hosting, because it's in Switzerland, our ministers get the opportunity to meet people that, okay, it's Switzerland, so they have to meet the Swiss ministers. They would never meet them, otherwise it's so complicated. So at least it gives us the 5 minutes of fame to be able to speak to. No, now, joke aside, what struck me the first time I went to Davos, and it has always struck me since every time I went, was that in the end, it's a lot of very intelligent, very powerful people who are mostly at loss to deal with the complexity of the world we are in. And contrary to the conspiracy theory imagery of all these 20 incredibly rich and powerful people plotting their next move to better dominate the world, and then when you're there, you realize that everyone understands that this world is very complex, that we are facing huge challenges, and that we need to put the best brains together. That's what Davos does, and I think it's very useful.
Okay. Other questions we have? Anybody else? One more here. Got a mic? Right here.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you. You have a rich legacy working on the continent of Africa. What is the West missing about Africa and the opportunities that exist? Specifically, what is Washington missing, in your perspective, that they should be getting right?
For the 50 or 60 years of the Cold War, the management of Africa by the West was delegated by the US to France and the UK. So there is not a wealth of knowledge about Africa in this city of yours. Africa is kind of an unknown quantity because it had been delegated. And then right now there is almost a total absence of a discernible Africa policy. What one should do is finally get away from the patronizing attitude that has been too long, ours, the West in general. First, because of the white man's burden, like we have to bring these people to civilization, and now the opposite, the post-colonial guilt-infused white man's guilt complex, which always puts us in a relationship with Africa that's unsound. Because a sound relationship with Africa would be a relationship like we have with any other continent, which is eye to eye. Speak at the same level, treat them as equal partners. And not like we did before, like people to be civilized by us, and now people to be helped because they need help. And the moment we will understand that we have to deal with Africa the way we deal with Asia or with Latin America or with Europe, it will make a lot of a difference. And there are a few African presidents now that are fairly vocal in this respect.
So I started asking you about your ornithology. So what is the bird that you're most happy that you saw that was so rare? And do you see these birds in Switzerland, or you see them in here, or where do you go looking for birds?
I just came back from Quintana Roo, where I've been birding quite extensively, so in Yucatan, in the Yucatan Peninsula. But I think probably my best birding experiences ever were in Kenya, because Kenya has so many different climates. It has mountains, deserts, savanna, jungles, coastal areas. And there was one particular bird, which of course you all know, which is called the blue-headed bee-eater. I'm sure you all know it, of which I was probably able to shoot one of the best pictures ever. And it took me a long time and a lot of luck to get those pictures. And that was probably one of my best birding moments.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so how many people here are birders? Anybody else? Okay.
There's at least one, two.
So let me tell you one thing I'm interested in birds about. So I funded this research at Johns Hopkins that hasn't worked yet, but it turns out that each of us are born with what they call hair cells in each ear, roughly 20,000. And as you get older, your hair cells die. So when you get to the point where you have no hair cells left, you can't hear. Birds, because I guess for evolutionary reasons, they need to be able to hear to fly, their hair cells regenerate. And so I've been funding a project for 7 years at Johns Hopkins so that I won't go deaf at some point, so that we can figure out how to get humans that regenerate their hair cells the way birds do. And so if we can do that, then humans will never lose their hearing. But we have not figured out exactly how birds have been able to do that. But that's one of the things that birds have evolved to do, which is to have their hair cells regenerate so they can always fly and always hear, right?
And for the two of us who are wearing glasses, their eyesight.
Right.
Oh my God, especially the eyesight of raptors. That is something
Yes.
that is just incredibly, it's amazing.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, question?
So what is your great white whale? What is the bird that you want to see the most? That you haven't seen yet?
The bird I want to see the most and that I haven't seen yet is probably the
Baltimore Oriole.
You know, it's the harpy eagle from the jungles of the Amazonas, and it's the biggest eagle in the world, and it's specialized in hunting monkeys, and it's very fierce and very impressive. Yeah.
Okay, wow. Okay, so actually, you obviously have a varied life and very impressive background, and we appreciate your inviting us into your home and educating us about Switzerland, birds, and Africa, and congratulations for being such a great representative of your country.